I think this is the slowest rate of change we're ever going to see. I just think it's going to get faster. Not to pressure anyone. Exactly.
I think there's also been, and this one's probably a little bit more recent, but a shift from efficiency-driven leadership to purpose-led leadership. What is your vision as an organisation? What are your values as an organisation?
I mean, the other day I was talking to my wife about changing all of our passwords, and my daughter goes, "Shh, an AI might be listening." And my daughter laughed, and I laughed, and Siri laughed. So, anyway, boom, boom.
One of the things I was very deliberate in coming into that was to not lose my humanity as you move up.
Yeah.
So if you talk to me here and we've got all the cameras and all the rest of it, I'm exactly the same as if I talk to you one-on-one or if I'm chatting on a Teams or sending a text, and that's been really important.
Welcome to this episode of Factors Common Factor series, where we're going to talk about global megatrends and the power of C-suite fusion. Today we're joined by three specialists, Liana Dubois, former CMO at Nine, Olivia Tyler, CPO at IVE Group, and Miranda Ratajski, CIO at Westpac. And I'm sure I got that wrong, but you can correct me when you introduce yourself in a minute. One of the key challenges that most executives have, apart from the issues of technology and staff and AI and governance, risk and compliance and reduced budgets, is communicating all of this to your stakeholders to make sure that you can actually do the job that you're paid to do. We call the ability of a C-level executive to mix with other C-level executives and speak their language to get what they need to get, C-suite fusion. And so the topic's going to cover most of those things today, and we're going to delve into some of the challenges and strategies that these ladies have achieved in getting to the level that they have in their organisation. So I'm going to start by asking Liana, self-introduction. Who are you? What do you do? And what's your current role?
Sure, thank you. So yes, Liana Dubois, the former Chief Marketing Officer at the Nine Entertainment Company. Nine is the house of brands that consists of Channel 9 and all of its television shows, the Sydney Morning Herald, The Age, AFR, Brisbane Times, WA Today, and also the radio stations 2GB, 3AW and the like. It's also the whole owner of Stan and a 60% shareholder of Domain. So I am the former CMO, but my role at Nine was to grow commercialisable audiences, essentially, as I would argue any CMO's role is, whether you're in media or in fast-moving consumer goods. But really, I've spent 25 years in the media industry for all of my sins. I've worked in a number of different organisations and with a number of different CEOs and C-suites where, I've seen countless mergers and acquisitions, significant digital transformation in media across the last 25 years, and really have a lot of lived experiences in terms of C-suite fusion and how important that is to be able to accelerate growth and innovation for organisations. So I'm looking forward to chatting.
Good, and not just one C-suite. Every one of those brands would have their own C-suite.
Every one of those brands has their own C-suite and their own stakeholders, and media organisations by nature can be quite complex beasts.
Yes.
And quite interesting to navigate. So I think this is going to be a really fun conversation.
Good. Olivia.
Yes. Nice to meet you. My name's Olivia Tyler. I am the Chief People and Sustainability Officer at IVE Group. So IVE Group is an integrated marketing company. We bring brands to life through a whole bunch of different channels and modes, if you like. So we're the largest printer in the country, but also we do a lot of brand activation, digital transformation, basically anything where you walk into a store, and our clients are usually the sort of ASX 200, any store or any presence where other companies are. If there's something printed or brought to life, you will most likely find that we have done it. So my role is quite new. It's the first time we've had this position at the group. We're just under $1 billion turnover in a company. We've got 2,000 people and really strong manufacturing presence in New South Wales and Victoria. So in my remit, I look after people and HR, or people and culture, safety, compliance and sustainability. So bringing those kind of threads together, I guess, is a mini fusion. And so really done that quite deliberately because of the adjacencies, which I'm sure we'll get through to as well, but also bringing in the lens of some of the challenges that are coming down from, whether it's a compliance, risk, governance angle on the ESG space, people challenges and what expectations are of new entrants coming into the workforce, how we maintain and transition skills and capabilities, etc., for new people, and obviously keeping everyone safe. So
Good.
I'm not bored. The summary.
Be very interested in how the ESG role was combined with the people role. There's obviously adjacencies, but most people wouldn't think of it.
No, I thought, we did, and we were like, because I was like, I've done sustainability and can sort of do it. I've done it for about 25 years, so it's like the biggest challenge is getting the people to do it.
Buy in.
To buy in. And my favourite line is from a Vince Vaughn and Jennifer Aniston movie, which is, you want to do it. And it's like, yes, I want them to want to do it, right? How are we going to do that? So that's kind of the genesis of that.
Good, thank you. And Miranda?
And you did an extremely good job on Ratajski. I'm Miranda Ratajski. I'm the Chief Information Officer for Group Business Units at Westpac. So I look after a number of the enablement functions. And I also look after a number of functions that are customer facing as well. So from an enablement function perspective, I look after risk and finance, legal and HR, those things that really make sure our employees have the experience that they need to have so they can look after our customers better. And then I look after some customer facing technology as well. So group operations, customer solutions, and making sure that we've got those right systems that are doing the right thing to look after our customers as much as possible. It's really good having enablement functions and customer functions, but particularly from an enablement function perspective, the thing I really love about my job is even though the technology is not exactly customer facing, we know every minute that we save our employees using a HR system or a finance system is another minute that they get to spend looking after our customers. So we pay a lot of attention to really measuring the value that we deliver and what that means for our customers, because that's why we're here.
Mm-hmm. Good, excellent. I'm sure it's been an interesting discussion. 3 very, very diverse roles with linkages, so that would be some of you overlap each other. Look, there are a number of global megatrends out there. We talk about the emergence of AI, hybrid work, the increased threat of cybersecurity, the importance of ESG. These are all reshaping each of your industries at an unprecedented rate. How do each of you think the C-suite is creating more resilient organisations and actually handling some of these changes? And I'll start with you because you're the first on the left.
Sure. Start with me first on the left and we'll go around the table. Look, I think if you look globally and locally, the most successful businesses and organisations have, incredibly collaborative, forward-thinking, innovative and sort of strategically creative C-suites. The importance of that C-suite fusion that you talked about is so paramount to long-term sustainable business growth. And on the flip side of that, you can really see the organisations where C-suites are disconnected. As I said, both globally and locally. I think, you mentioned the word resilience. Resilience, for me, resilience and adaptability are kind of no longer game changers. They're no longer sort of, a competitive advantage. They're table stakes and they're just survival traits. But the sorts of things that I think do bring competitive advantage if a C-suite can collaborate together and adopt these sorts of things is agility, that collaboration and that foresight to be able to see what's kind of coming ahead and around the corner so that you can then innovate to be able to drive that long-term sustainable growth.
So, Olivia, your HR role morphed into an ESG role with an HR add-on. Is that how you did that?
No.
You kind of went, hey, I want to do this, so let's just put it in there, or is it more deliberate than that?
It's a bit more deliberate than that. So as I said, my background is mainly in sustainability from that perspective, and I describe it as it's ESG before we were confused on what it was, right. Which I'm not confused, but apparently there's a lot of confusion out there. So it's very much around, how do we shore up against risks and whatever they might look like, but also capitalise on different opportunities, particularly for customers who are really angling into this because they have their customers and their consumers really motivated by it. So I think the breadth or depth or interest that I bring to the C-suite from a emergent priority area is we've always, in sustainability, always had to adapt to something on the external that we didn't fully know how it was going to turn out. And so really what that has taught us and honed our skills in that kind of vocation is, so what is it, how does it manifest, but what does it actually mean? Because there's so much hype and kind of noise, and so you're forever going, oh, this is the latest thing, is it a thing? If yes, proceed. If no, what do we need to do about it? So I think that's where the C-suite has to have that one eye on what's going on, and obviously those emergent trends, but being really pragmatic and practical around, well, what does that mean for us now? What does it mean tomorrow? What will it mean when we don't really know? And sometimes it might be take action, and other times it might be let's just hold back and wait. So I think bringing in those different lenses is part of that piece, and the gift of the C-suite should be that yes, you have your own vertical and you have your own kind of remit and your own experiences, but you bounce off each other, and everyone has a different voice and a different perspective, and it's having those challenges around integrated decision making, so asking different questions than we might have in the past that can adapt differently to those emergent threads that are coming through, but also, well, what does that mean really day to day, and then how do you translate that back? Because if you don't communicate back out to your teams, it's like, well, what is it that we're talking about? So I think that's a really important role for that C-suite.
So you touched on the adaptive part. What about the resilience part? How does this contribute?
I think it goes both ways. So the resilience can also be how, and particularly in an HR role, you are tapped into pressures that are coming through the business and how are they manifesting, and how do you then give the organisation line of sight in advance if you can, and then how do you sort of augment what you might be doing or taking that lens into account, because, you know, we all say this and everyone says it over and over again, change is a constant. It just depends on what flavour it is.
Yes.
So the resilience, to your point earlier, it's not like a new thing, it just is a thing. So how do you, and what you're bouncing around on will just vary. So having that kind of flexibility, but also that you don't want anything too structured sometimes, because then it won't be able to switch quickly. So how do you take that into technology as well as into all of the other things that are kind of coming down?
Good. So you've touched on technology. I'm going to hand over to Miranda. So you have lots of things that you're responsible for running and making sure it works. Sustainability, people often think it means climate change and green and reduction in waste and whatever, but to me sustainability is all about making sure the organisation can survive, not just on the environmental side, but on the business side as well. And so you cover lots of areas like GRC and risk and finance and whatever. How do you see your role as a CIO contributing to the adaptability and resilience of the organisation?
It's absolutely critical, and on a whole number of different layers. And I think the first thing I want to call out is that, pardon me, I think this is the slowest rate of change we're ever going to see. I just think it's going to get faster. Not to pressure anyone, exactly, because we've seen the rate of change that we've seen, and we know that it's going to continue at this level, or potentially that rate of change will get faster, which is what I expect. And knowing that that's coming means preparing to be able to deal with that. So building systems that are resilient and that are easier to change. Also understanding, what you see some of those future trends that are going to be. And I think, resilience is really important at a very basic system level, but also the people and what they're doing. And, inherently, I think what is the most important is having a really clear strategy and a direction for knowing where you're going. Because what that will help you do is make sure you're focusing on the right things, you're prioritising the right things. And all of the problems you mentioned at the beginning of this, I face into pretty much on a daily basis.
Look at you.
I know. And it's a fun job. It is a fun job. I'm never bored. I never worry about that. I'm never bored.
Technically, as a marketer, I'd call them opportunities.
I like that better. Shall I run with that?
Yes.
We have numerous opportunities that I get to deal with. Yeah. And AI is an interesting one. AI's been around for more than 50 years,
Totally.
but what we're seeing is that acceleration of that, and that, people wanting to make sure that, everyone wants to be using it. Are they using it safely? Are they getting the right outcomes? Do they have the right data that they need to be able to do it? And I think having that clarity on the strategy of where you're going really helps align. But I also think it helps you pick the right people, because if you know where you're going, and you know what you can do, then you know who you need to supplement that team. Exactly. Yeah. So having that diversity of team, and we often, gender diversity is incredibly important, but it's also that broader diversity piece, that, people who bring diversity of thought so you don't get trapped into siloed thinking.
Diversity of lived experiences, of all of those. The definition is so much broader.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that diversity of thought, so you don't get caught in siloed thinking that there's only one way we can do this and this is absolutely the way the industry is going to go. So I think, having people who are really curious having people who are really interested in speaking up and challenging the status quo and what we're doing. And also, as you say, those people who are forward-looking and looking at some of those things that are going to come to us next, but also having those people who are there to make sure everything keeps running and you've got that resiliency that you need.
Yeah, Craig, I think on the sustainability question that you asked, I always find it really interesting where ESG sits in an organisation, whose core responsibility it is. So in my former life, it was the second hat of the CMO.
Yes.
To be the executive leader to the board and the CEO. The role of ESG is now becoming, thankfully, far better understood. And is kind of, again, in those global and local organisations that are the most successful and are innovating and growing. It's recognised now as it's not a checkbox or a compliance, minimum compliance thing. It's actually the way that you create, it's long-term value creation, really. And it's how organisations are attracting and retaining top talent, how they're getting investment, from the investor market. It's how their customers are now leaning in. It's the expectation of next generation that from an ESG point of view, your fiscal sustainability, your long-term business sustainability isn't at the detriment of people and planet. And I think, the faster that, organisations can understand that that's what ESG is and sits, you can sort of start to move away from, well, sustainability just means climate change. Actually, it's talking about the long-term sustainability of your business.
And we have graduates. Like, the graduates want to know what our sustainability policies are, and so I think
one of the first questions out of their mouths I often find in interviews.
Exactly.
Where are you at on social issues and what are you doing environmentally?
Yep. So, you really want to be clear on that and the level of import that it has, because it's going to help you determine who's going to be attracted to come and work in your company.
Yeah.
But also, just to build on that, like, you sort of mentioned where it sits, it should sit everywhere.
Correct.
The challenge is all roads keep leading back to the person with it in the title.
Yeah.
And we've been trying to go, no, join in. So it's really around, and I think a lot of the mandatory reporting and all of those sorts of things, which, not everyone loves from a day-to-day perspective, what it has done is showcase the role of the CFO, the role of the CTO, the role of the CPO, because everyone's got a bit to play.
100%.
And it starts to take it away from, it's just the form you have to fill in, or it's the pretty report you put out at the end of the year. It is actually bringing all of that together. And I think that's we've been trying to push for that. But also it just gives you a blueprint for how to deal with anything else that might come down the pathway, because the whole point of operating sustainability or sustainably is that you ask different questions. It's not just about, well, how much did it cost? It's like, well, define cost and where's the boundary and how are we measuring it and how do we track it? So you just have to start going, what's a different question I can ask when I'm signing this off? And that also applies to whether it's AI or whether it's, different types of workforces and all those sorts of things. So I think it's a good precursor and a blueprint to follow for any organisation and any role in that way.
I agree. And then it embeds it into your day-to-day. So
and then I
instead
can go and be on holidays.
I
go and find something else to do.
It's actually become quite mainstream. The questions on mentoring, mentoring an IT student. And a few weeks ago, he said, there's a strange question on my form. I said, what is it? He goes, in the interview questions, has our ESG policy influenced you in any way to apply to this company?
Interesting.
All the questions about that, and there's just that one.
Yeah,
never heard of it? I went, never heard of it. Go and look it up so you can say you've heard of it, and then has it influenced you? Because you can't say, no, I've never heard of it. But anyway, so it's become mainstream. But it's, as you said, it's not just tick the box. It's very, very serious right down to the beginning. Look, I'm going to change tack a little bit. Later on, we're going to talk about AI and technology and trends, but I just wanted to talk about all of you have had comprehensive careers over a reasonable period of time. What key shifts have you seen in enterprise leadership over that time? Like, compare it to when you started. I won't ask when that is.
I've already aged myself with 25 years in the media industry, so we can go there. It's all right.
I gave up counting after 3 decades in IT. So, what have you seen? Start where you want, but what have you seen change?
So,
and we had a conversation over coffee about this and the role of diversity in this change as well.
Yeah. So I've quipped quite a few times about 25 years in the media industry. So I started a long time ago and it was very, very, very different back then. I would say some of the biggest shifts that I've seen in sort of enterprise leadership and leadership thinking and kind of mindsets. I'll start with one of my absolute favourites to call out, this shift away from this command and control style of leadership to one that is more about empowering and aligning the organisation and leading through kind of empathy and authenticity and all of those sorts of words. I think that shift actually really, really helps the second one, which is kind of breaking down functional silos into cross-disciplinary kind of teams to kind of enable that enterprise level thinking and that asking different questions and diversity of thought and all of those sorts of things. I think there's also been, and this one's probably a little bit more recent, but a shift from sort of efficiency-driven leadership to purpose-led leadership. You know, the fiscal success of our business should not be at the detriment of people and planet. So what does that mean? What is your vision as an organisation? What are your values as an organisation? And that should then start to be the kind of lens in which you start to make decisions on the things that you're going to do. And then I think there's been a real shift from, you know, if I even think, so 25 years ago when I first started, but if I even think about, say, my parents, how I observed my parents in the workforce in kind of their era, this kind of move from real stability, like nothing kind of changes, personnel don't change, legacy ways of working exist, you know, continue to exist, to this idea of complete, you know, adaptability and agility, which is really, really exciting if you're of the nature to embrace change and really lean into, you know, innovation and difference and challenging the status quo. I think you said before, I think there's, you know, it's really, really exciting. And I think those things only continue to progress even further. Because as I said, the next generation of people, of talent coming behind our generation, the generation ahead of us, the expectation is so very different about the leadership experience that they are going to have from their organisation. It's incredibly different.
Yeah, definitely. And look, I would add, you know, my role currently is the first large C-suite role. I've had an MD role in a smaller consulting organisation, but one of the things I was very deliberate in coming into that was to not lose my humanity as you move up.
Yeah.
So if you talk to me here and we've got all the cameras and all the rest of it, I'm exactly the same as if I talk to you one-on-one or if I'm chatting on a Teams or sending a text, and that's been really important because I think that congruence, and it is harder sometimes to do that because you're forced into different situations where you may not have great news to communicate, but you've got to do it in a way that's really authentic to you. So how do you do that and show the workings and all of those sorts of things? So that is definitely something that I think is much more, well, I've certainly brought that in, and I think my peers and everyone here would be doing the same thing, but it's a conscious choice.
You think it's more accepted now?
Yes. So that's the so I've never had a problem with being me, which is, you know,
Yeah.
I don't know, I'm sure there's a word for that, but it's how it's accepted in the audience that you're in, which has been a little mixed.
Yeah.
Let's
So
just say.
years ago, when you do all those psychology tests that you would do you know, for leadership training, they talked about your public face and your private face.
Yes.
And it used to be, and so mine was always, Craig, you're exactly the same at home as you are at work, and my kids are a little bit worried about that.
Yeah.
But,
If you ask them to do a PowerPoint presentation, that's all limit.
that does happen, and spreadsheets occur occasionally, but we never circle back and put it take it offline. Miranda.
I like the point you made around authenticity. I think that's something for me, and there may be a 3 at the beginning of how long ago I started my career. And it's...
Well done.
Still here.
Yeah.
It was very much that, you know, there was an accumulation at the top of the pyramid of power and opinions, and that was very much the way that it was done.
Yes.
And almost there was like a facade. But some people it was the real people, but you know, you were very stoic, you were always in control, and you always knew what was going on, which we know very rarely happens.
Yes.
Well, certainly my job. And I think what happened with that is there was more of that shift to more of a servant leadership approach to how you're doing to really supporting people and getting the best out of them. And that point you made around authenticity is so critical to that, because, you know, what I found over the years is people respond so much better to people who are authentic.
To realness.
Because
even
they
if
trust.
it's a bad story, if you're honest about it and just say, hey, this is where we've landed. Can't change the outcome. Sorry, but this is what we've really tried. These are why we've got to this point. Everyone's like, oh, okay, well, I might be still disappointed, but at least I still respect where you're sitting and where you're coming from.
Yeah.
And, you know, and that C-suite fusion really depends on that as well, because so much of it's about trust. And you're going to trust someone more if you feel like they're genuine and they're bringing the real them to work. Not 100% all the time, as you say, not everybody wants to see the complete, me. But
You can go too far with it as well.
exactly, there are limits. We were talking about what some people turn up to meetings wearing, but I do think that authenticity and trust. Simon Sinek has a great talk that he does around this, around trust and performance, and that once you've established that trust with people who are authentic and are going to do what they say they're going to do. They're the people you want to work with.
Yeah.
They're the people you want to have on your team. They're the people are going to be upfront with their stakeholders, even if it's not great news.
Yeah.
But if something goes wrong, they're going to tell them quickly. They're going to be clear on where they're at and where we're going to next.
Yeah, that idea of doing what you say you will do, it's one of my all-time favourite sort of lines. It's so critically important, even if it's not the most popular thing to do, or it's going to have impact. Do it with realness and a bit of compassion and humanity for people. I think COVID was actually one of the great accelerators of this change in leadership style. For better or worse, everybody met each other's significant other, children, cats, dogs, the whole kit and caboodle, and it broke down some of that. I think. In my career, certainly, in more junior roles, there always seemed to be this huge gap between, middle management or juniors in an organisation and the C-suite. But it really broke down some of those barriers, I think, and I actually think it's in some ways encouraged the next generation to be able to see, actually, I can get there. That person's got a dog barking in the background and their kids running through in their undies, and they've got a life outside of what they do when they're suited and booted and they're standing in front of me delivering a message.
And that lawyer who had a cat
that was
set up on his laptop by his daughter. I'm not a cat. That was really funny.
I love the guy that did, I can't remember what country it was in, but the guy that he was doing a media interview in his home office, and his kid just rolls in, and it was just priceless, completely priceless.
But I agree with you. I think COVID had a massive impact on that. I regularly have the Canine World Wrestling Federation going on behind me, and it taught me a lot about how, irrespective of what was going on in the background, and people were so much more tolerant. And then often I think people introduced that in and normalised it, which I think as a broader leadership principle is, no one's going to be perfect.
Yeah.
And I think when I was really young, I thought you had to be the perfect leader. And now I just see that as a way to set yourself up for failure, because you're never going to be perfect. Yeah. But being as authentic as you can be, and people trusting you and being upfront about what you can do or what you can't do, it's a great place to start.
Yeah, and what not to do is like the guys in the English version and the American version of The Office.
Yes.
Pretend that they're imposter leadership.
Yes.
I can't watch it.
I know, it's cringy.
Can I give a little anecdote and pick up on something that you said about just being you, and you've never had an issue with being you.
No.
And thank goodness
Maybe I should have.
thank goodness that leadership styles and leadership mindsets have cottoned on to that thing being a thing. I often get approached in the media industry by next generation, in particular young women, who will come to me and say, how have you maintained who you are? Because I've known you for a very long time. How have you maintained who you are, and your sunny disposition and your optimistic nature, and the fact that you still wear clothes that are all the colours of the rainbow, when I observe so many other senior executive women in particular really alter who they are and who they become when they enter the C-suite. And I subscribe to your exact same theory. I've been me for good or bad.
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell you my exact age, but for a long time. And she's gotten me to where I've gotten to. And so why would I change her? Yeah. Yes, I'm a constant learner. I'm constantly curious. I want to grow and I want to, absorb more knowledge and all of those sorts of things. But I'm not going to fundamentally change my character or my personality. And I think it's so refreshing for those young women, in particular in the media industry, when they go, I don't have to change fundamentally who I am. I just got to grow and learn and kind of be better.
Well, that brings me to a point. You've been able to navigate that, and all of us have been able to do that to some extent, but a lot of it relies on the culture of the organisation and the leader. People don't leave companies, they leave their managers, generally. And I'm sure we've all had that situation. So, Olivia, talent acquisition, retention, workplace culture, these are at the heart of organisational success. How do you actually navigate this in a world where, AI can just create hallucinations? I mean, the other day I was talking to my wife about changing all of our passwords, and my daughter goes, shh, an AI might be listening. And my daughter laughed, and I laughed, and Siri laughed. So anyway, boom, boom. And then we had
joke already.
a dad joke. Yeah.
How many minutes in are we?
Every day I tell my team a boomer joke every morning, so just to keep in practice, because
judgment, Craig,
they
no
haven't heard
judgment.
them for 30 years, so they're all new. So what strategies have you found that help overcome the hybrid workplace or the go back to workplace, depending on where you work? The use of AI, the use of other technologies, the culture of working with people. Like in our office, there's probably 5 generations.
Yes, and we have the same thing, and we were just to answer that, but also to pick up on the point around trust. So for our organisation, the belief and trust that they have in their immediate team and their immediate leaders is really, really high. So that's a really strong, cultural artefact that we want to celebrate and definitely maintain and retain. But I think also when we start seeing all these, things coming down, these are enablers or tools, if you like. It's not going to do it for us. And so how you partner with it and how you wield it, I guess, in some ways, in the best way, and that best can change depending on what you're trying to do. But I think the commercial alignment, but also understanding that, where are those pockets of reticence for change? What are they founded by? And also when you have such a multivariate workforce, you mentioned about the different generations or cultures, it's really breaking down those silos and being more authentic. You can have a conversation with anybody. Like, we're not hierarchical, really. So you can kind of ring up anybody or ask anybody, hey, this is what I've got my concern, and you really start tapping into what are those bubbling areas, both of opportunity but also of risk or of concern that you can start accessing. And I think the role of HR might provide a framework, but it's really we're not the command and control either. And so because our business is so diverse, and just talking from IVE's perspective, we've got 4 very core, or 5 if you look at for across the whole function, very different business units. My goal is, here's the round yard of the walls and floor, etc. Some areas are quite strict because there's a reason, there's a compliance requirement, or security or those sorts of things which you don't want to muck around with. But everything else, you want it to be a little bit choose your own adventure. Not fully, but within the round yard would be great, just because it'll be a mess trying to clean it up afterwards. But it is around having that flexibility, and I think that's the difference as well around, it's not just, well, this is how it works and we just put a cookie cutter on everything and it all just is meant to go like that, because humans are different commercial results are different, or targets and customers are different. You have to have a way of being able to have mass customisation in that way. So I think that is really important. And also HR's role has changed. We're not just the tactical, hey, I've got a problem, let's do this. It should be, where are we going? How are we going to shape our workforce or hire in talent? What skills are we missing that we should get or build or borrow in, all those sorts of things? And how do we bring that in as a partner, as in advance as you can, ideally, but not always, and how do you actually start building that? But the culture piece, it's not like you send out a form and it all goes, well, our culture is X. It's kind of the vibe. And so every vibe's different, and microcultures are really good sometimes, because then you get test cases. Oh, what did you do that worked? Or what did you do that didn't work? What are the differences? So I think that's more that curiosity. Yeah. And that's where that C-suite fusion has to come in. Everyone has to realise that they're all part of the cog as well as the frame. So
I'm sure we've probably all observed organisations where people think the people and culture function is responsible for the culture of the organisation, and that's just fundamentally not the case. The C-suite and every individual inside an organisation are responsible for the culture of an organisation. Now it's up to the CEO to drive any cultural transformation or change that needs to occur, but it's up to the C-suite as well to, really kind of drop the guards, drop the barriers and the silos. And, what's that? There's a saying, and I don't know whose it is, so apologies, I'm not going to be able to quote it, but, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Yeah. And, C-suite mindsets must change and evolve to be able to future-proof their companies, because that rigidity and that siloed kind of way of working and thinking that it's somebody else's job to drive the culture of an organisation, which is fundamental to the long-term sustainable business growth of it, it just sort of has to be eradicated. It's everybody's got to hold hands and play together and be strategic business partners with each other.
So as a member of the C-suite, how does the CMO influence this, get involved in this?
Yeah, so really, really important for the CMO to have really strong relationships with, like the CFO and the CMO, for example, can be an extraordinarily influential kind of power couple, and I say that in a positive way, not power as in a negative way. But they have to be able to partner together to work out where best to invest the dollars so that commercial growth, continues into the future. Or the CMO and the CTO or CIO from a tech point of view, how are they going to work together to fundamentally improve the customer experience? And to your point, to the experience of your people. So it's really about kind of finding that common language together, being really clear on what your vision and your strategy for your business is. And then I think just as a human being, having some empathy and some respect and acknowledgement of the different skills that sit around that table and for you to be able to deliver your part, how you can capitalise on what somebody else's skill set is to be able to kind of couple up and become a really dynamic duo, I think is really important.
It's a great quote. And particularly when we look at technology now, there's very little that we do without technology now left in our businesses. So I think, it's really important that we work hand in glove with our stakeholders and we really understand what their needs are. And I very deliberately hire people who have experience working in those businesses or working with those businesses. So they don't just understand the technology, they've got clarity around the business problems. And, for me, it's actually a bit of an early warning sign about culture when I hear people referring to tech and the business. I think, something's not going
It's a divide
quite right
there.
here. This is that's not that. We're all in this together, and it's a united outcome that we're looking for. And exactly as your quote says, the only way we're going to get there
is together
and faster is by going together. And I think the other thing we see a lot is people seem to think that technology is going to fix everything.
The mythological beast of they.
And all you need is a new tool and everything will be fabulous. It'll be all sorted, right? And, what it can do is it can, very much accelerate things. But the best implementations I've seen is when you've got the people, the process and the technology humming together, right? That is when you get the outcomes and you deliver the most value in the best amount of time, rather than just thinking that this one particular leg of the three is going to fix it. You've got to have all three together. And that's back to that C-suite fusion again, whichever project it is, having that alignment of what we're trying to get to. And I think also that C-suite role modelling. Right? People are constantly looking to see what those behaviours and that culture is, and the best way to get that to go further and embed it further is by role modelling at that level.
A great call out.
And I didn't, that's such an important point, and just to, it's like some remote control unit that's
we don't know where they are. They're in a shadow somewhere.
They've never turned up. But it's also, but also, going back to the clearing the way and all those sorts of things around what the roadblocks are. But at the end of the day, you've got to kind of work out how you're going to turn up.
Yeah.
And that's in you, and that's all part of the you.
Agree.
And the you might not be having a fabulous day, and might not be firing from all cylinders, and it's in a bit of a mood, but that's okay. You kind of just make a call and go, I'm going to put that aside and just have to show up. But I think how everyone at any level of an organisation can do that, that's not the C-suite necessarily having to dictate that. That's creating an environment where that's a great place and safe place to be. But I think that's really important. And also the role modelling, you don't realise that as much, and it's interesting how that plays out in a COVID hybrid area, because you can't see them, whereas I have been told before that if I multitask on a Teams call, particularly when there's bad news being delivered in other organisations, apparently I'm like the flight attendant, and it's like if the flight attendant's face starts looking bad, then the whole team goes, what's going on, what's wrong? And I'm like, oh sorry, I'm just reading an email that's got nothing to do with the conversation.
With this call.
Sorry. Mental note to self, do not multitask while I'm on a Teams call.
Because they're watching you.
Because they're watching, and I never realised that so much. And, that was a rookie error, and it's like, always smiling. But you have to be really aware of what that is.
You said a really great word there, safe.
Yes.
That psychological safety and the C-suite role modelling for the entire organisation, that psychological safety is a thing, that everybody who's been employed by the organisation has been employed because they've got skills and experiences and stuff that organisation wants shared with them. That's why we're all paid salaries. But creating a culture where you've got that psychological safety for people to be able to speak up, and the most junior person in the organisation right through to the most senior person in the organisation feel as though they can share without fear of repercussion or any of those sorts of things is really, really critical. And I think the C-suite plays an incredible role in creating that culture and as you said, role modelling that culture for all to see.
So Miranda, you talked about technology and people just think technology is the answer. I mean, there's an old saying that says to err is human, but to really foul things up you need a computer. Right.
It's pretty accurate.
Well, faster. What role do you see technology playing in executive decision making, creating a culture going forward?
I always
All
love
these technologies are very confusing. Where do you see what are the main ones and what's going to happen with them?
Look, I always love it when I ring a call centre and they say, "Oh, I'm sorry, the technology's having a bad day." It's like, it was mostly created by humans, don't you? I was like, just calm down, Miranda. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. You don't have to be defensive. Look, I think that we told the computer what to do. When we put the technology in, we have requirements that are written that we test against for the outcome of what the technology is doing. But, I think it's easy. It's easy to just go, it's the technology. But I think, what that also means is often what we need to do. And I think one of the most important things about technology, as I mentioned before, is understanding the business we're trying to solve the problems for, because then that helps you hone in on the type of technology that's going to best address those. And, we talked in the Megatrends, about AI and a number of the big trends that we're seeing. And I've seen a lot of them over a very extended period of time. And I think the most important thing about selecting the technology is being able to speak in the same language as the people you're delivering the technology in. Now, irrespective of what it is, being able to understand, for example, if you're putting, a particular system in, what that's going to mean. What is going to be the business benefit? What is going to be the value? And what also comes out of that is it's going to help you get your projects prioritised. If you're clear on the value and can speak to it in a business language, I shudder to think how many meetings I've been in when very well-intended engineers have just gone right into the depths of engineer speak, and the poor people sitting in the table, their eyes have just rolled back into their head.
They may have been speaking, another language.
Exactly. So I think, when I look at the things that are happening around technology, Gen AI is a massive one. But, the important thing about Gen AI is that your data's right and you can trust the data, and that, what you're doing with it is responsible and safe. And if you're concerned about it, that you've got the right human controls in there to make sure it's doing the right thing. And, I think what we're seeing with, it's just like when automation came in, everybody was worried about automation because it was like, it's we're all going to lose our jobs because of automation. No, it's not. You're not going to have to do the boring stuff anymore. And that's, I'm an AI optimist because it means we can get computers to do some of the more boring stuff, and then we can do the interesting stuff that we're better at doing, and get the computer to do it. But I think, some of the bigger trends we're seeing also is, really the value of having diverse teams in technology. There's only, on average, it's about 27% of technology that's female. And, we're doing it. I'm really lucky to work at Westpac, where we've been at the forefront of diversity for a long time. We had the first female bank teller, we had the first female bank manager, we had the first female CEO of the Big Four. But what I really aspire to, and it's because of productivity, is if your teams are diverse, you're going to produce better technology and you're going to be more productive. And if you have diverse teams who look like your customers, they're going to be designing better products and services for your customers because they understand them, so they know actually, what they want. So I think, looking at some of those trends we're seeing, it's making sure that you've got all of those things we've talked about embedded in what you do to your technology. You've got the right culture around what you do. You've got the diversity of thought. You've got people who will speak up and challenge. Because, as I mentioned, when you've got people, process and technology, that technology is an important part of what we do, but it is that one part. You've really got to have those other two working with it as well. And it's a really exciting time to be in technology because things change at the rate that they do. But I think getting lots of different types of people working in technology is really important, because then we're going to get better products for our customers.
Yeah, from a marketing point of view, it's so important for CMOs to be connected with their CTOs and also to have their teams connected and talking to each other as well. Because, from a marketing point of view, a big part of the role is to be the voice of the customer and to understand what's going on in culture and to be able to articulate that back to the business so that you can, design products and services, that are going to be matched fit for that customer inside that culture. And so, if I think about, what marketers need from a MarTech point of view, being able to work with their technologists to go, okay, here's what we're trying to achieve, here's what the outcome is that we're looking for? What's the work-back plan that we can design together to build or buy that piece of technology and that piece of kit that's going to be able to get us to reach our customers with, greater efficiency, greater effectiveness, and, enable that kind of business growth that I was talking about before. It's so important that the interplay between CTO and CMO is really, really strong.
I agree completely.
Yeah.
So we've covered a wide variety of topics, from ESG to culture to jokes to being yourself to...
We've run all over the playing field.
Sincerity to AI to cybersecurity, governance, risk and compliance, people, culture, different generations, diversity and inclusion. We're going to wrap up by asking you one question. What is the biggest barrier, a one-liner from each of you, to cross-functional collaboration that you see, and how can companies overcome them, and what have you seen work? So, Liana.
In fact, you only want one. I've got a list of 6, but
okay.
If I say one and the lead,
you got a minute.
Okay. So I think culture and leadership generally, as big lofty buckets, can be kind of numero uno when C-suite fusion doesn't work. If that C-suite, can't sit in the sandpit together and play well, and share Tonka trucks and all of those sorts of things, that becomes very, very challenging. But typically, the sort of more practical stuff that sits beneath that creates challenges is things like competing priorities and KPIs, and a lack of transparency on who's on the hook for what. A lack of that common language, I think we've talked about a few times, that sort of organisational language that everybody gets. Everybody knows when you say that word, that's the thing that you mean. That really siloed decision making, rather than that cross-functional, more diverse voices and opinions kind of at the table. I think legacy and a resistance to change can be a real barrier. And I agree with you, the pace of change is never going to be slower. It's like what is coming ahead and around the corner is going to continue to quicken. And then the last piece for me is probably around I've seen in many organisations that I've observed from, say, the outside, when technology and their data capability is sort of a bit awash and it's not connected and it's not actually being used as a kind of a centre of intelligence as the brain of the organisation to feed all of the other divisions. I think that can create some real challenges as well.
Olivia.
My one I think we agree with all of those ones, but it goes back to me. I'm all about sort of that self-leadership and I think self-awareness. So we talk about how we think it's great having all of the diversity in there, but does everyone else think that too? And how do you, and I do this a lot, and that's why I think part of the authentic leadership is to say, geez, I really buggered that up, sorry about that.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing, it's like I go in with my mindset, but hang on a second, what value can the person opposite me also bring? And how do I go in with a bit more humility and, those sorts of things. So I think if everyone did that, you'd all hear what the benefit was. So that self-awareness, I think, in hearing and, go back to my movie reference, the want to listen to what everyone's doing. Can't believe we're putting that as the pinnacle of how to do it, but anyway.
It's the only part of this we're going to use.
Exactly. That's your basic, that's your sell line. Yeah.
Miranda.
I just think just to touch on that point before I move to mine is making the time to do it.
Yes.
And I think, when you're often looking at C-suite people, you're so busy. You're jumping from one thing to the next. And one of the things I'm really mindful of is when someone wants to tell me something is trying to really be in the moment and listen to them. Because the only thing worse than not asking someone's opinion is asking them and not listening to what they're telling you. And I think, for me, when I think about that C-suite fusion, it's absolutely that enterprise mindset. And you've touched on siloed thinking. It's very easy to get caught in your lane about what's going to help you be successful, and being really crisp on why you're doing that, and, and how your technologies, how my strategy ties into the technology strategy and how it ties into the bank's strategy. And I was talking to someone on my team about the fact that I was doing this afternoon, and he was saying somebody talked to him about a really good way to understand where someone's coming from is to ask them what team they work on. And I work on Team Westpac. I don't work on team technology. I don't talk team part-time with CMO partnership sort of technology. And I think just people really being able to understand how they do, what they do, how it ties to that group strategy and how it ties to making our customers' life better helps keep that collaboration going.
Look, thank you very much. Each one of these topics is probably worth its own common fact episode. We could go for another few hours. We've already been talking for a couple of hours, including coffee. But thank you for your time. Look forward to catching up again. And it was great having you.
Absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.